Welcome, everybody. You are attending another Bruce Gallery event. Tonight, we have three animators connected some way to Edinburgh, and I'm going to turn this event over tonight to Brad Pattulo, who is currently on the faculty at Edinburgh.
Hey, gang. My name is Brad. I teach here. I'm an animator. I'm in my 18th year, believe it or not, of teaching animation at Edinburgh University in lovely Edinburgh, Pennsylvania. The weather is currently a balmy 10 degrees Fahrenheit. We have with us two artists who have work on display currently in the Line show, which is currently in Bruce Gallery. Soheila Azadi, say hi, and then Martha Gorzycki.
Hello.
So I guess we'll start by having the two artists introduce each themselves and tell maybe just a brief biography here. I guess Soheila, I'll start with you since you're on the left-hand side of my screen.
Sure.
You're both, all right, so you were a student at Edinburgh, and I was a professor at the time, correct?
Yes,
Right.
yes.
I remember that. So, all right, just give us a brief biography, maybe a couple minutes of your whole life.
Sure. I'll try. My name is Soheila Azadi. Now I'm based in Portland and in Iran. I'm originally from Iran, and I studied traditional animation at Edinburgh University in 2013. I graduated, and then soon after I went to graduate school in Chicago at University of Illinois at Chicago, and graduated in 2015. I was teaching at the Art Institute of Chicago for 3 years. And then I moved here to Portland. Now I'm currently teaching at Portland State University.
Okay.
Can I add this?
Yes.
You were one of the best professors I have ever had.
Oh,
to this
me?
day.
Oh, thank
Yes,
you.
you.
Oh, yeah. Oh, thank you for that.
Sure.
I love my job, so I don't know if that helps with that. That I feel honored and grateful to be doing what I'm doing. So maybe that comes through. Thank you for that.
It does. It does.
All right, Martha, maybe just a couple minutes of your whole life there.
All right, thanks, Brad. Thanks, Lisa and Brad, for inviting me and being part of the Line show. My name is Martha Gorski, and I have been working in film since the mid-1980s. Started working in animation with cell animation and working with independent filmmakers in the San Francisco Bay Area. I had the great opportunity to teach at Edinburgh for about 2.5 years in the late 1990s, and enjoyed that very much. Loved the artistic community there. It was a great group. But then I came back to the Bay Area working in media and other fine art kinds of work before taking a job at San Francisco State University, where I've been coordinating the animation program for 20 years. So I just missed you, Brad, if you've been teaching at Edinburgh for 18 years. So moving from celluloid animation into digital enabled me to start exploring installation art rather than just traditional cinema, which plays on a large screen, mainly in the storytelling format. So that's my intro.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the Line show a little bit here, and I guess that can be a starting off point. Soheila, your piece is fabric and mixed media. I guess because you do a pretty broad variety of types of work. I guess could you comment on, because you were doing performance art and a lot of stuff involving fabric and found objects. I guess tell us a little bit about the piece that's in the show, and then kind of relate that to your body of work as a whole.
Sure. So the piece I have in the show is called Baba, which means father. And later on, when I do my presentation, you'll see how it is directly, not only in form, but also in concept, how it's directly, related to other pieces I've done. But it's a textile work mainly. It's knitted. It's a knitted piece, and do you want me to start with my presentation and then talk about
yeah, we can do that. You both have presentations prepared. Let's start there. And why don't you just transition into that, and we'll go from there.
Sure. I'll let me share my screen first. Just briefly talk about the concept that I'm tackling in my work. And then I'll talk about the relationship between this work and my overall work. Again, I'm from Iran, and my work is very much inspired and is based on where I grew up and the system that I grew up in, which is a theocracy. And for those who don't know, theocracy is when laws are intertwined with religion, and in this case, it's Islam. And I sort of narrate stories of lived experiences of Muslim women of color in different forms. And I grew up in Iran, and the way it is constructed, the society, there's so many, public and private spaces, and the way they are constructed, they are based on sex. I grew up, being confronted by this, wall that always was, in a form of fabric, brick walls, etc., that was separating the space in half. And I always, because I grew up, because I was born a girl, I always, belong to the female side. This work resonates with me by Shirin Nishat, mainly because you see how women belong to one side, men to the other, and there's this separation, there's this fabric that separates them. And I specifically in my work focus on the female side, which is the way I look at it, thinking about how this heavily gendered private space, which is the result of religion, they are becoming spaces of creativity. Yes, there's oppression, but also there's liberation in them. And so I specifically focus on what are the sort of products that come out of these gendered spaces. And one is craft. This is a work that is kind of, it was a start for the piece that we have in the show. With this piece, I had, so I started this piece in graduate school. I want to go back a little bit and start with when I was in Edinburgh. So I remember I studied traditional animation, but then I realized in my classes that I might not be the, traditional cartoonist or traditional, animator, but I'm so grateful that I had that opportunity to study there, and I gained loads. And what happened there was taking so many art history classes as well, and I was introduced to performance art. And from there, I realized how much I have love for works that are experienced with your body, and you can activate them. And so there was a point in undergrad that I made so many pieces, but I felt like they were sort of coming off as the, feminist works that were somewhat angry. And but there was at that point I had to, do all of those works to be able to get past that point and get to where I am now, and where you see on the screen and the work you see at the gallery. So in graduate school, I realized the power of humor. And even though I have always been very humorous, but it never came through in my works. And then I started thinking about, this sort of language that we have that is problematic, and we have them in different cultures. And the title of this work is one of them. And we have a very similar one in Farsi, which indicates women don't have brain because they don't have balls. And I started basically thinking about balls and how and why, thinking about, men sitting on their balls, and that's what give them power. And so I started, playing with the idea of balls, and how do you sort of feminize them, etc. And so I talked to my mom and my aunt, which I thought all three of us are the closest to my father. And my father uses one of those phrases often. And as a way to get back to him, we collaborated on a series of works, which one of them is in the show. And the title Baba comes from it. That means dad. And the work that is in the show is kind of, I constructed my father's brain, which is filled with balls. All of them are, there are multiple ping pong balls inside the piece. And it kind of looks like a brain, but it kind of also looks like ovaries, and, sort of thinking about all those forms and confusing all of them, and sort of layering the idea of what is feminine, what is masculine. But the start of it was from this work that you see on the screen. And I basically gave just sizes to my mom and my aunt. All of them live in Iran. And I just told them, just these are the sizes, go have fun with them. And so we collaborated on this. And I was specifically thinking about that private space, which would be the space of creativity, and the place that my aunt and my mom would make these pieces. What kind of conversations did they have? What kind of storytellings was happening, etc. So and sort of thinking about the result of these private spaces and heavily gendered spaces coming out into the public, and sort of making them interactive. You can actually touch them, right? And funny enough, with this piece, we had all men writing this, piece. But there are basically actual basketballs, ping pong balls, tennis balls and volleyball balls inside this this piece. And eventually, after being in the gallery for a month, all the pieces were coming off of it, which I think at the end added to the piece, sort of taking away that power that I'm talking about. So I wanted to push further that idea of, you know, sort of making fun of, you know, the masculine body. And so I was like, what if we squish the balls, make them bigger, but squish them, but in the most natural way? And that would be, you know, by the audience, by the viewers. And so again, I gave my mom and my aunt the size. And I have to mention this, that my dad thought this is such a radical project that he funded all of these pieces. And he's so proud of it. And so again, these are actual, you know, jumping balls covered in this women's work slash craft. The audience were invited to interact with them, and you see how so many of them have different patterns. And I was, you know, as I was talking to my mom and my aunt, I was just fascinated by the way they were, you know, coming up with, you know, each pattern and each color, etc. And again, I'm interested in those sort of conversations they've had, but also keeping those conversations that were in the private spaces private. This is another piece, sort of all of these are in the same line. How much time do I have, Brad? Did you time this? No? Okay, no worries.
I didn't time you, but I don't know.
No worries. I'm just presenting maybe the works that are related with to the work that is in the show.
Right.
Because I mean, I look at here. Let me pass to this work. Maybe this is a better way. Because I mean, I also look at hijab. Hijab is a covering up for Muslim women. So I look at hijab also as a private space, and thinking about women, Muslim women have agency and choose to decide who has access to you know, their hair, etc., to the private space. And I was thinking about, you know, the Afghani hijab. I mean, although we've been sort of, I don't know, we've been in Afghanistan for many years. We had been, but almost so many of us don't know about the covering up there. And this is what it looks like. Except this is a crochet piece that my mom made, and the pattern is actually called Afghan in the West. And sort of, you know, thinking about that private space, but bringing the private space out to the public. And there was light shining from inside. So this photo doesn't do justice, but all these patterns were sort of lights coming through each of these, you know, Afghan patterns. And again, I was interested, and you know, my mom had worked with many of her Afghan friends. If you don't know, Afghans and us, we speak the same language. We are neighbors, and there are the majority of immigrants in Iran are Afghans, and so they have always been close to us. And for me, it was, I felt like it's my duty to, you know, to make a piece like this. And so I was mostly interested in the conversations my mom had with her Afghan friends, thinking about what sort of length does this have to be, etc. I'll finish my talk with this. How about that? my presentation. So again, thinking about the hijab and covering up and the hair as a material that can be private, right? And the public and private, it's all about who should have access to what and why, you know, and thinking about Muslim women having that power to allow access to whoever they desire. You know, I find that so radical. And I have to mention, I don't identify as a Muslim, but there was a point living in Iran that I had to cover up, and I still have to cover up when I go home. And I see a huge difference when it is forced versus it is, you know, by choice. And when it is by choice, I see it as such a radical move. And so with this piece, again, bringing in sort of a critical humor into the work, I went to a salon in Iran, and as women were cutting hair, I asked those who I knew were covering up based on their choice, I asked if I can use their hair. So I collected, and almost all of them said yes, happily. And so I collected their hair and felted it into fabric and gave it a form of text that you see here. And again, this is a product. This is not a product. Yeah, the whole thing is the product, but also the object that is highly private is out into the public, but in a completely different form that now makes it okay to become private and public. We'll end it there. How's that?
That's good. I'm going to turn it over to Martha in a second, but you, Soheila, you, your work at Edinburgh, I remember, generated some controversy. You were slightly canceled. Is that something that continues? Because like the themes are, you know, the themes in your work can, I guess, be considered, you know, topical and, you know, touching nerves. And so is that something that that still happens to you? That your work is generating controversy, or no?
It does, and it depends on my audience. I have to say, in the West, Edinburgh was one of the few ones that thought my work was sort of controversial, to a point that my performances were stopped, and I was forbidden to perform, and I was informed 2 hours prior. But I think that those things actually add to my work. You know, one of the works that I was planning to do at Edinburgh was on abortion, and it was close to, I remember, election, and for me that tells us what sort of society we're living in. You know, and I always say, you know, my works are inspired not only based on you know, living under theocracy, but also now living under democracy as a woman of color, which I didn't have that title living back home, and sort of being a second citizen, and also as an immigrant in the US. So yes, to some degree that.
Okay. All right, good. Thank you. Martha, well, I'm going to move on to your presentation. I guess whenever you're ready, go ahead and start.
Okay. Okay, can you see the screen? Okay. So let's see. So I'm just going to start with the piece that I did that kind of inspired the Unfurling piece, which is in the line show. And pretty much throughout my life, dreams have been very inspiring and have shaped perception and my ideas of how we perceive and the kinds of realities that can be perceived, you know, like the surrealists who juxtapose very unusual elements together, elements that aren't normally seen together, was a big trend for part of the surrealist movement, not all of it, but and so this piece titled Veil was inspired by I do yoga and meditation. And so the idea of this kind of inner vision and the stillness that comes through silence and through sitting and through just breathing and being very, very present. And so this idea of stillness, which in this piece represents the two large eyes. And then given how hyper our culture has become, you know, we have screens everywhere, we're looking everywhere. There's such a distraction. And I mean, I've certainly noticed that in the 20 years of teaching, how the attention span has really been eclipsed. And when I think of the influence of, say, the remote control, or, you know, we're changing things in an instant, going here and now on our little electronic devices, swiping, going, it's like everything can be instant, gained instant. And so this idea of juxtaposing these eyes, there's about 48 eyes animating and collaged over the still eyes. And for me, bringing those together, my first impression was, it looks like the smaller eyes are almost gnawing at the large eyes. And so for me, it had a kind of conceptual feeling, which is such a contrasting kind of vision. And number one, who's looking at whom, right? But then also this idea of eroding this idea of stillness and of really seeing something, you know, what I felt when I collaged these eyes together, the 48 animated eyes, is I felt that they're everywhere and nowhere at the same time. They're seeing and they're not seeing. They're looking, but they're not seeing. So putting these two together was the start for wanting to experiment with how media can change in terms of how we perceive the piece depending on how it's installed. And my first installation of this piece, I was in a back room in a gallery. The room was painted black, it was covered, and I created this veil, Soheila, this kind of, I put fabric around the door frame to frame it. And then I built a frame, and I had just the, it was maybe a 13-inch by 5-inch strip of Mylar. And I had the video projected onto that. And so you could walk around it once you were on the inside. But from the outside and across the gallery, when you looked, it just, all you could see were these large eyes hovering in this black space that was framed by this fabric. And so that was one kind of perception. You know, you felt there's a sense of presence, but it was a very still kind of presence. And then again, reading it based on, you know, the framing of the doorway and the interior being very dark. When you came closer, obviously, then that's where you could see the eyes moving and animating, and it became a very different idea for some people. It was a little spooky, it was a little scary and disconcerting. And so I really appreciated how the feedback I got after this show in terms of how the installation itself, how the space, how all the elements that you use to accompany it can change our very perception of how we experience it, depending on our distance to and from the space and the piece itself. And then I'm not sure I've been having problems with this playing, so if it doesn't play, I'll go to, well, Unfurling. I guess I'll just scroll through it. There we go. So this is the piece in the show. And Unfurling was inspired after many, many years of driving cross country across America. And the natural landscape in the US is very diverse, you know, bookended by coasts and oceans, and then deserts, mountains, forest, and meadows, and the prairies. And over, I'd say, a period of more than 20 years, probably close to 30 years of going cross country, I started to notice that the cultural landscape is become very homogeneous. And so the same kinds of logos, the same kinds of strip malls were appearing. And I remember on one trip, I got very confused thinking I was in Iowa, but actually now I'm in Utah, but it was the same stuff. And so that was part of how this piece came together. The other part was, you know, in terms of how to use, or why I use the American flag as a template. I was standing in San Francisco. Potrero Hill is a pretty high up view. And I was standing out there one night watching rush hour traffic. And of course, the freeway kind of curved. And I noticed in this, you know, the darkness, you had these red and white stripes of cars. And I thought, oh, that almost looks like a flag waving. And so that's what inspired using the flag itself as a template for how to explore this idea of the flag itself represents what we call the United States of America. And so my question was, what is it that unites us? And it was that question, and then this idea of the template of the flag, and then the observations starting, you know, through just my experience driving across America. And so here again with this piece, I was curious about different kinds of installations. The first iteration I did is I created this fabric box so it would have a relief when it was projected on a wall. And the idea of that, obviously the flag itself is made from fabric, but also to give it a kind of dimensional effect, which I thought was very interesting. So when that was just projected with the fabric box, it gave one kind of sense that was closer to the actual flag, or experiencing an actual flag. And the idea, as I started collecting the images that I would collage together, and I did all of this in using Photoshop and After Effects, and figuring out a way that once I created the striped templates, and then the stars templates, the square, that I could just keep transforming them and cross-fading and just keep swapping out and watch the iterations of this flag just continue to unfurl. In the money flag here, the zeros and ones, there's a conceptual element where on money, you see the words liberty, and you see the words "in God we trust." And so in the moneyed flag, where I collaged the zeros and ones, I scanned in money. You can't do that now because Photoshop won't let you, but back then you could scan in a bill and Photoshop wouldn't scold you or forbid you to do that. So that's a curious thing. But the zeros and ones are also in binary code. And so the zeros and ones where the white stripes are spell "in God we trust." In binary code where the red stripes are, it spells liberty in binary code. So I was trying to, just sort of weave different ideas about, what all these elements will mean. And then, of course, in the one contrary element to all of the consuming, the logos, the money, the barcodes, the one contrary element were these windmills against a blue sky. And I thought, that it's like we're more than just consumers on this sort of hypnotic way, and the pulse and the tempo, the timing of all these crossfades of all these elements, to me are kind of synonymous with how we just kind of tune out and consume. And I'm certainly one of them. I don't make my own clothes. I don't grow my own food. I mean, we are consumers in terms of survival. But this is also kind of a questioning piece, or designed to be somewhat introspective and reflexive, not necessarily scolding or, as a critique, but as a way of thinking about, how we participate as Americans in this kind of cultural phenomenon and identity. This piece was extremely successful. It played all around the world in just about every kind of format imaginable, from outdoor billboards. This one here was on Sunset Boulevard on one of their big business strips. It played there every half hour, every day for 6 months. And then juxtaposed between the art, it was part of, there were other video art pieces chosen. So we were rotated. And these were 2 billboards. And there was advertising juxtaposed between the video art pieces. So it was a very interesting way of reading this piece in the context of business and consuming and busyness, which I thought was very interesting. After 9/11, I did an earlier version of this. And after 9/11, this film played and people saw it as a very different concept. And so the idea that history can change the reading of a piece, the fact that, America's attacked the Twin Towers and all the flag waving. I don't know if other people experience this, but I would go, say, to put gas in my car, and the merchant would give me a little flag decal. There was this patriotism, there was flag waving, there was this pride, where these, America's been victimized, by this terror attack. And so this piece became, it had a whole different identity just based on 9/11 from the original sort of exploration of consumer identity. And there was a French film critic who had said that, in the wake of September 11th and the patriotism, this piece could be conceived as a desecration of the sacred American symbol, which could then also be conceived as an act of terrorism. I thought that was a little dramatic, but again, we read art in the context of the times. There's the intention and what inspires us to make it, but then it's out of our hands in terms of how time and different kinds of events can change the read of a piece. And that to me was really insightful. And then another way that I've explored this piece is as a little pin, animated pin that I can wear. And so this is on an iPod, I forget which version, but now when I first made this piece, I had the idea to wear it, right, as a little pin, but this technology didn't exist. It does now, and so it's kind of fun to have moving, animated, wearable art. So I'll stop there.
You had that pin last time you were here. I remember it.
Yeah, I did. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I still have it.
that piece, well, I don't know. You touched on a lot of different stuff. One discussion we have now that we didn't like in the past is something you touched on, art versus artist, and like the intention of the piece versus how it's interpreted, and that can change obviously with the context and with political climate and all that. Yeah, I mean, and that piece. So I don't want to get too technical about it, but is it a looping? It does loop, correct? So it can just loop forever.
Yes, it does loop. There's different versions because it also played in film festivals with other films. So then I had to create titles, beginning and end, but always when it was installed, it would be looped. Yeah.
So that kind of blurs the boundary of time-based art, like if it doesn't have, I mean, it's moving, but it doesn't have a beginning, middle, or end. So you're kind of playing with that concept of like, is the art time-based, or is it like, is the movement part of the texture of the piece? Yeah, fun. Yeah, I love that piece. I remember seeing it when you had it here on a pin. And then, I saw it in the show. I'm like, yes, it's that piece.
No, I think
So
that's an interesting point, Brad. The idea of time-based versus something that's more textural or impressionistic, right?
yeah, I like that. I mean, I like exploring time as an expression of life almost. And I think that's one of the things that drew me into animation and time-based art is kind of the idea that we're kind of stuck in this timeline, um, or like we can't control time except when we're making films or animations. We have a little bit of, but otherwise like time just goes in and we can't move it. So I guess I was hoping to transition into the idea of like animation and film and 4D art as an art form and other expressions of it. We get a lot of students coming in and a lot of in our culture that animations for kids, or that it's like has to be like a certain way, or it has to be narrative or story based. I guess I'm wondering if either or both of you could maybe comment on that, like other expressions of the art form besides just movies and television and like the obvious things that people um, think of when they think of animation or film or media. Um,
Yeah,
just, yeah,
I'd
Martha.
be happy to start to say something. Um, when I was there, Chuck Jones came to visit at Edinburgh a couple times when I was there. And, always the first thing he would say when he did a workshop with students was, animation is about invoking life. We give breath and we make life happen, and that's what animation is, giving breath and so this idea that there's storytelling, which is a construct, and in a traditional 3-act, beginning, sort of climax, and then resolution, the 3-act play or 3-act story is very traditional. One thing that's happening now, which I'm thrilled to see, is studios now are really looking to represent different kinds of storytelling. And there's a push to hire a lot of people of color to really look, the Hollywood, the sort of, overarching dominant form of storytelling is not the only kind of storytelling there is. So this is one thing that I think we're going to continue to see, really different kinds of stories. And certainly, Soheila, your work is telling us stories, that you're representing points of view and cultures that haven't been necessarily represented very well in the United States. And then I think the other thing is this idea, because animation gives life, and because now we can make work on our laptops, on our desktop. I mean, think of the 60s and 70s, film wasn't accessible except for corporations because the equipment was so expensive. You know, then media arts organizations opened up, you'd pay a fee to be a member and you'd have access to equipment. And then some of the smaller equipment came out, and then there was access. So one of the things we're seeing now is because digital tools are so much more accessible than actually celluloid film tools, we're going to see a lot more experimenting with this. And this also is very exciting. So.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's it's sort of an emerging thing where anybody can make a movie now, like, because you know you can spend $1,000 and have everything you need. Soheila, do you want to comment? Are you still doing time-based
Yes,
stuff?
yes,
So, do you want to add to that, or?
sure. I mean, I did a couple of music videos as a way to tell stories, but I feel like when we talk about storytelling, I mean, it's been happening since the Stone Age, right? from you know, drawing on the walls of caves to you know, cults as a way to you know, tell stories, but the sort of modern way of telling story definitely is to use digital media, right? But as Martha mentioned, it seems that we're trying to go back again to appreciate other forms of storytelling, like performance art. I would say is one of those that, you know, because you're engaged with your body, and you're engaging oftentimes the body and mind of the viewer, also is a very interesting form of storytelling. But anything, I feel like anything that moves tends to for me at least tends to engage the audience more, and perhaps that could be why there was a point that, you know, there was more focused on you know, on digital media. Yeah, and I still do digital media, but I mean, you also talked about, I mean, how everybody can make videos. Can I disagree with that? Because, you know, that requires, you know, having access to equipment, and if we're coming from a lower class community, I mean, it's kind of impossible. And honestly, I don't belong to a lower class. I belong to a middle class, and but still I find it you know, challenging to have access to equipment and etc. And one reason that I wanted to teach was to have access to, you know, different softwares, etc. You know, having to even buying a software seems impossible for a student, and not even students, even for me as an adjunct, you know. So these are realities that we are as makers being confronted by, but hopefully wouldn't stop us there, right? Because I personally, there was a point that I couldn't afford so many things, but then all I had was a pen and a paper, and that was my form of storytelling, you know.
I remember when I was in grad school and I was poor, I drew a picture of, like, this is my ideal art studio. And I had all this stuff, and I was like just kind of dreaming. And there was like a guy, like kind of a middle-aged guy in my class, and is like, looks at it and goes, "What, you don't have all that?" I'm like, no, I'm in my early 20s. I don't have any money. Soheila, your work never really, I mean, even as an undergrad, you were doing work that wasn't necessarily narrative. You were always kind of experimenting more with emotions and textures, right? So it seems like you are always drawn to that sort of, I guess, abstract or experimental form of expression.
Right. If we're saying narrative, uh, and if you're meaning there's a beginning and there's a body of the story, and if there's an end, yeah, I wouldn't say that my work has any of that. But I always say it's narrative, but it might be in a more conventional way, right? It tells the stories, but the story is not there for you to it's not chewed and fit to you. You have to sit with it for a while to and you might have to see it several times to just extract the narrative, let's say.
Yeah, it doesn't hit you over the head.
No.
You go to even like film festivals or animation festivals, you go and most of the stuff is like that. Like expression, artistic expression. I mean, you see work that comes out of Hollywood and it's very generic and homogenized and kind of they want as many butts in the seats as they can get, because they spent all this money making it and it needs to appeal to as broad of an audience as possible. But if you're just expressing yourself as an artist and you're speaking to other artists and or filmmakers, animators, or enthusiasts, you can use metaphor and you don't have to hit people over the head with what you mean, I guess.
Right. And I think if I might add, we already talked about financial challenges during the storytelling, let's say, because we're kind of talking about storytelling. But for example, for someone like me who English is my second, third language, and I was not familiar with the culture for such a long time, and still it takes me so much to familiarize myself with the American humor, American pop culture, American culture in general. It's all of those are challenges that one has to face, other than the the challenges that other people face as native speakers, etc. I'm bringing that up because I want to go back to my, if you don't mind me telling this memory I have when I did the animation, paint on glass animation. I remember I worked so hard on that piece, and I did the credits, and I came and I was so proud of it. I came and showed it to you, Brad, and I was like, what do you think about it? And you were like, pretty good, but you didn't spell the permission right. So I had to go back actually and reanimate the whole thing because
Ooh.
I mean, English is my second language, extra.
I'm sorry.
No, I mean, I'm just saying, the challenges, thinking about, how easy it might come for some people, but not for everyone, perhaps.
Okay. I wanted to get to this question in the chat. Somebody asked, was there ever a piece that you created that you would now go back and add to with the power of hindsight? I think for me, that's every piece I've ever done, but I don't know. Does anything jump out at you as Martha, does anything jump out as
That I would change? I would say, I think that's a good question. But for me, reworking something, I jump into something new. And so I'm always learning. I'm always thinking, oh, it could be better this way. Let's apply what I've learned to the next piece. And, aside from tweaking pieces based on installation, or if they're in a festival, so you're reworking things that way. But I learn every piece is informing the next one in some way. So I just move ahead and start developing the next piece based on what I learn.
All right. Soheila, what do you think?
Yeah, I think with digital pieces, it could be more well put, that because with other pieces, for example, with this sculpture, if you already sculpted it, it's just set. There's no way of going back to it to refine it. But you might have to remake it. But with digital work, and that's why I remember someone told me to keep everything with digital work. And so if you need to go back, you go back to it and work it. I can't think of anything that I would go back. But there are many works that I want to do that I haven't had the chance to start even.
Yeah, I can barely stand to even look at my old films, let alone go back and work on them again.
The only thing I would say with that is one more thing is that Unfurling was made before HD existed. And so showing it now, it's very soft because it's in the lower resolution standard definition. So if I've thought about remaking it in HD so that it would really look much better. But I've been working on other pieces, so I may get to that at some point.
That's actually, yeah, I did that as well. I did an HD remaster of a film I did in 07. I didn't really change anything of the content of it, but I just made it bigger, basically. Do you see Unfurling as a piece that would evolve, or is it kind of that's the piece? Or would you consider adding like different logos or whatever to it?
Yeah, I think, in fact, Brad, that's something that I've been thinking about. If I'm going to remake it in HD, what am I going to do differently? What will I add? And I think with the way that I strung the logos together, I wasn't really spelling anything. And I thought, I wonder if a more deliberate kind of juxtaposition with some of the neon signs could develop something, a different idea. But definitely, I don't know the answer to it, but that's something that I've been thinking about. Yeah.
It seems like the kind of piece that could. I mean, as the culture changes, some of the logos, and I'm not telling you what to do, I don't know.
No, you're absolutely right.
Well, I guess that's all the time we have, because you got to go at like 7, right? And
I'm
was
just
good.
I'm
was
going to
good.
jump in if I might.
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
So this is Lisa Austin from the Bruce Gallery, and I want to welcome all the honor students who've attended tonight. Make sure that if the honor students could just type their name in the chat to get credit for coming tonight. I also want to do a commercial to say thank you again to the Edinburgh University Student Government Association, and also to Edinburgh University and Erie Arts and Culture, which helps to fund the Bruce Gallery. I want to point out that both of these artists are represented in the Line Show, which is in the Bruce Gallery through February 4th. It's open Monday through Friday from 3 to 6 and by appointment. And I also really want to thank Brad Pattulo for moderating the conversation tonight. And I really want to thank both the artists who I admire so much. Soheila, your comment about gendered private space as a place of both oppression and liberation, I think is really beautiful, and leaves me with something really to think about. Any kind of strictures in our life can be, how do we work with them? And Martha, I found it really compelling that you talked about the unfurling as the same piece that over time changed meaning for the public because the world changes. And isn't that true of all of art? When we return to it, things that we loved as a child, as we grow older, we start to see different things in them. And so our experiences created change as well. So thank you again. It's right on the nose, 7 o'clock. Please follow us, brucegallery.info on the website. And I also want to comment that we will have this recording on our YouTube channel within the week. Thank you again, and good night.
It's great to see both of you again.
Thank you,
Same
Brad. Thank
here.
you,
Touch.
Lisa.
Thanks.
Yeah, keep in touch. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.